Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're doing something a little different. Usually we're looking at a specific event, a tech breakthrough or maybe a historical mystery. But today we are looking at a system that every single person listening has survived.
Survive is a good word for it.
And that many of you are still navigating, whether you're a student, a parent, or, well, just a taxpayer.
We are heading back to school.
Sort of, yeah, sort of, but not to talk about lunchboxes or the trauma of gym class.
No.
We're looking at the machinery of education. We have this fascinating glossary of educational terms, and I know that sounds maybe a little dry on the surface.
It does sound a bit dry, yeah.
But when you actually read through these definitions, you realize something pretty quickly. This isn't just a list of words. It's kind of the blueprint for how society is built.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
It's the architecture. We tend to think of education as just schooling. You go to a building, you learn things, you leave. That's the user experience.
Yeah.
But underneath that simple word schooling, there's this massive complex engine of policy, funding, and, well, philosophy. And the specific words we use to describe that engine, they matter. They tell us what we value.
And they also hide a lot of the reality, don't they? There's so much jargon. You hear phrases like two-tier system or curriculum reform, and your eyes kind of
Lays over.
Exactly, they glaze over. But these terms, they're the ones that determine who gets ahead and who gets left behind.
Precisely. So our mission today is to decode that jargon. We are going to strip back the paint and look at the load-bearing walls of the education system.
I like that.
Because we need to understand the difference between the act of learning and the system of management. Usually when we're confused about why schools work the way they do, it's because we don't understand the definitions of the system they are operating in.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation, the structure itself. There's a phrase that comes up constantly in political debates, and it's rarely used as a compliment. Two-tier system.
No, you never want to be accused of running a two-tier system. By definition, in our glossary, it's a setup where you have two separate levels of operation, and crucially, one is distinctly better than the other.
It implies a hierarchy. It's not just different options.
No.
It's a VIP section versus general admission, where the general admission view is, obstructed by a pillar and the seats are broken.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this hierarchy, it usually stems from how we organize entry into schools. Which brings us to this great philosophical divide in education, selective versus comprehensive.
Yes.
These are two fundamentally different ways of viewing how society should treat children.
Okay, so let's break those down because they sound like technical categories, but they are, like you said, opposing worldviews.
Yeah.
Selective is, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's exclusive.
Right. A selective system is one where pupils are chosen for entry. The school doesn't just take whoever lives down the street. They are gatekeeping.
And how do they gatekeep?
Usually it's based on two specific things. Academic reasons. So, how smart the child looks on paper or in an exam, or the ability to pay fees.
So you either need the grades or the money to get past the velvet rope.
In a nutshell, yes. That is the definition of selection. You're filtering the population. Now you contrast that with the comprehensive model.
Okay.
In a comprehensive system, the gates are open. Everyone enters without an entrance exam. It is open to all comers, and it is free because it's funded by the government.
The philosophy there is it's entirely different. Selective seems to prioritize excellence, or at least concentrated potential, whereas comprehensive is chasing that golden concept.
Equality of opportunity.
Exactly.
That is the phrase everyone wants to claim. Equality of opportunity. It's the idea that everyone should have the same chances. It doesn't guarantee everyone ends up in the same place.
Of course not.
Or that everyone gets the same job, but the starting line is supposed to be the same for everyone.
Which brings us to the darker side of selection. If you don't have equality of opportunity, what do you have? The glossary uses a pretty charged word here, elitism.
Yes, elitism is defined as favoring a small privileged group. And this is where the debate gets really heated.
I can imagine.
Critics of selective systems argue that they are inherently elitist. They siphon off the resources and the best students for the few, leaving the rest with less. Proponents, however, would argue they are protecting standards and creating centers of excellence.
It's that classic tension, isn't it, between raising the floor or raising the ceiling. But here is where I get stuck. How do we even know if a system is working? We are obsessed with measuring this stuff.
Oh, completely.
Modern education just feels like a mountain of data. And sitting at the top of that mountain are the League tables.
The dreaded league tables. These are lists that rank schools or colleges from the absolute best down to the worst. The ranking is usually based on exam results, graduation rates, things like that.
It turns education into a competitive sport,
Yeah.
like looking at the Premier League standings.
It does.
But here's my question. Does measuring the system actually change the system, or are we just observing?
That is the million-dollar question. And the source material points us to a very specific and somewhat worrying verb here, perpetuate.
To make something continue.
Exactly. There is a strong argument that league tables perpetuate the very divisions they're supposed to be measuring. I mean, think about it. If a school is labeled badly performing in a public table, what happens?
Well, logic dictates that parents who have the means to move or choose a different school will. They'll avoid it. The teachers might leave. Morale tanks.
And the bad school gets worse, while the good school gets more applications, more funding, better resources. So the measurement reinforces the outcome.
So the inequality becomes inherent in the system.
That's the phrase the glossary highlights, inherent in. It means it exists as a basic, permanent part of it. It's not a glitch. It's baked into the design. If you design a system based on ranking and competition, inequality might just be inherent in that architecture.
You can't have a winner without a loser.
You can't.
That is a heavy thought. That we're building the inequality ourselves by how we choose to measure success. But we can't talk about structure without talking about the fuel that runs it. We have to talk about money.
The economics of education. And this is where the language gets very polite but very pointed. The terminology used to describe class and finance and education is almost its own dialect.
Yeah, I noticed the glossary uses some euphemisms. We have better off and less well off.
Right.
Which is just a nicer way of saying rich and poor.
It is. Better off means richer. Less well off means poorer. You will see these terms in policy documents constantly because saying poor children sounds harsh, but children from less well-off backgrounds. That sounds like a neutral statistical category. It softens the reality of the economic gap.
And then we have this term for the institutions themselves, well-endowed, which outside of this context might sound a bit different.
Yes, strictly talking about institutions here. If a school or university is well-endowed, it doesn't mean it has a nice gym. It means it is receiving a lot of money in grants or gifts from rich people. Those gifts are called endowments.
It's like having a massive trust fund.
Exactly. And that trust fund allows them to weather storms that would bankrupt a normal school. It also allows them to offer financial aid. But even there, we have to be careful with our words. There is a huge difference between a scholarship and a bursary.
Oh, I'm glad you brought this up.
People use them interchangeably all the time.
They do, and it always trips me up. I just assume they were two words for free money for school. What's the functional difference?
It's all about the why. A scholarship is money given to pay for studies, but it is awarded on the basis of academic merit. It's a reward.
A reward for being smart.
Essentially. It's designed to help a student excel, to achieve an excellent standard. You get it because you're already winning, in a sense. You are the star quarterback or the math genius.
Okay, so a scholarship is a gold star that comes with a check attached.
That's a perfect description. A bursary is different. A bursary is money given based on need. It's not about your grades, it's about your financial situation. It's an attempt to level that playing field we talked about earlier.
So a scholarship reinforces excellence, but a bursary supports access.
Correct. And understanding that difference tells you a lot about what an institution values. Are they paying for talent, or are they paying for equity?
That makes a lot of sense. Let's move up the ladder a bit. We've gone through school, maybe we got a bursary, and now we are heading to tertiary education.
Tertiary refers to education at the university or college level. It's the third stage after primary and secondary.
And most people there are undergraduates. They're doing their first degree. But this is where the economics shift from being a policy abstract to, well, to my bank account is crying. We have to talk about tuition fees versus student loans.
A critical distinction in the modern era. Tuition fees are the price tag. That is the money you pay to receive the teaching.
The sticker price.
Right. Student loans are the mechanism, the money you borrow from the bank or the government to pay that price tag, which you then have to pay back once you are working.
And looking at the source material, there's a really interesting adjective used to describe the relationship between high fees and student numbers. The word is depressing.
Yes. And we don't just mean sad, though it might be.
Yeah.
In an economic context, depressing means reducing or pushing down. High tuition fees can have a depressing effect on the number of students applying,
Especially those from...
from those less well-off backgrounds we just mentioned.
It literally presses the numbers down. It acts as another barrier.
Exactly. If the risk of the loan feels too high, the talent stays home. The cost becomes a gatekeeper, just like the entrance exam in a selective system.
It's amazing how a word like depressing can work on two levels there, the emotional and the economic.
It really does. It captures the mood and the math.
Okay, so we've built the school, we've ranked it, we've funded it, or gone into debt for it. Now let's actually walk through the doors. What is happening in the classroom? We always hear about the 3 R's.
The classics: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Which always annoyed me because only one of them actually starts with R.
It is a linguistic stretch, isn't it? But it represents the foundation. In modern policy speak, though, we don't usually say 3 R's in serious reports. We break it down into literacy.
The ability to read and write.
And numeracy. The ability to count and do basic math.
These are the metrics that keep politicians up at night. If literacy and numeracy rates drop, the system is failing. But who decides what gets taught beyond that? We have the syllabus.
Right. The syllabus is just the plan. It's the list of books to read, the math problems to solve for a specific course. It's the menu for the semester.
But that menu can change.
And it's always at the mercy of something bigger. Curriculum reform.
Now that sounds like a political event.
It usually is. Curriculum reform refers to changes to the national syllabus. It's when the government steps in and says, we need more coding, or we need more patriotic history, or...
We need less art.
Exactly.
It feels like the goalposts are constantly moving. I think every parent has experienced this. Suddenly, the way they teach math is different than how we learned it, and we can't help with homework anymore.
That is curriculum reform in action, and it makes it hard for schools to keep up. We judge students on how well they handle this shifting content. We label them high-achieving.
Which means performing at a high academic level. These are the kids who excel.
But notice the language contrast here. When a student does well, we call them high-achieving. When a school does poorly on those league tables, we label the institution badly performing.
That's an interesting nuance. So we credit the student for success, but we blame the system for failure.
Or perhaps we are just identifying where the breakdown is. But what stops a student from being high-achieving? The glossary highlights 2 specific barriers to learning. One is distraction.
Defined simply as something that takes attention away, which in this day and age implies smartphones, right?
Almost certainly. But it could be anything. A noisy window, a hungry stomach. However, the second barrier is much more malevolent. Bullying.
The definition here is threatening behavior.
Yes, and it's important to see this not just as kids being mean. It is a systemic failure. If bullying is present, it creates an environment of fear.
And you can't learn when you're afraid.
Biologically, you cannot learn. It shuts down the literacy and numeracy parts of the brain. It makes the standard lecture hall. Doesn't work for everyone, usually due to a disability. It's about adapting the structure to the child rather than forcing the child into the structure.
And the gold standard for that seems to be one-to-one.
Yes. One teacher, one pupil. It is the most resource-intensive form of education possible.
It's expensive.
Incredibly expensive. But often, it is the only way to effectively support those specific needs. And this is where the tension lies. Schools have guidelines, official advice on how things should be done.
And might say provide one-to-one support, but the budget says, here is one teacher for 30 kids.
Exactly. And that gap between the guideline and the reality is where a lot of parents find themselves fighting the system. They are armed with the guidelines, but the school is constrained by the economics.
I want to pivot before we wrap up because we've been talking a lot about kids, but the glossary reminds us that education doesn't stop at 18. There is this term, mature students.
I love this term. It sounds so dignified, like a fine cheese. A mature student is simply an adult who is older than the average student.
It's a great reminder that the university lecture hall isn't just for 19-year-olds finding themselves.
And it ties into the whole concept of lifelong education or continuing education.
Yeah.
The idea that in a rapidly changing economy, you can't just front-load your education in the first 20 years of your life and expect to coast for the next 50.
You have to keep upgrading your software.
Exactly. The system has to accommodate people coming back to learn new skills, often alongside those undergraduates. And often, these mature students are the most high-achieving. because they know exactly why they are there.
Right. They're not there for the parties. They're there for the syllabus.
They're there for the syllabus.
So when we step back and look at this whole list, from comprehensive to bursaries, from curriculum reform to lifelong education, the difference between schooling and education becomes pretty stark.
It really does. Schooling is the act of attendance. It's showing up. But education, in this context, is a massive engineered machine designed to distribute knowledge and opportunity.
And like any machine, it has friction points. It has two-tier gears that might grind against each other. It has depressing levers that reduce access.
And it has the goal, the equality of opportunity, which is the engine that is supposed to drive the whole thing forward, even if it often sputters.
When you understand these words, you can't really look at a news headline about schools the same way again. You see the mechanics behind the story. You realize that a debate about tuition fees isn't just about money, it's about access. And a debate about league tables isn't just about data, it's about how we define quality.
That is the power of vocabulary. Whether you are that mature student thinking about going back or a parent agonizing over league tables, these terms define the structure of your life. And if you don't know the words, you can't read the contract society has written for you.
Before we go, there's one last word in the source material that I want to leave everyone with. It's a verb, and it feels a bit philosophical for a technical glossary.
Perceives.
Ah, yes. Perceives. To see or consider.
It makes me wonder, how does this system perceive success? We've talked about league tables and high-achieving metrics. But is this system capable of perceiving anything else? That is the provocative thought. If the architecture is built entirely on data, exams, and rankings, does it have the capacity to perceive character? Can it perceive creativity or happiness?
Does the machine perceive the student or just the statistic?
I think that's something every listener needs to answer for themselves. What do you perceive as a good education? Is it the one that gets the highest rank on the table or the one that produces the most curious human being?
Something to mull over. Thanks for decoding the blueprint with us today.
Always a pleasure.
See you on the next deep dive.